The Everglades were supposed to be dead by now. That was the prediction. That was the warning. That was the story everyone accepted as fact. For years, the footage coming out of Florida's swamps showed the same thing over and over again: giant Burmese pythons swallowing deer, wrapping alligators, and moving through the wetlands like something that didn't belong on this continent. Scientists called it an ecological apocalypse. The public called it a lost cause. But then something strange started appearing on the cameras. Not destruction. Not total collapse. Something else. Something moving quietly beneath the surface. Something nobody was watching for. And the more scientists looked, the more unsettling the truth became. The pythons weren't the end of the story. They were only the beginning. Because what's happening in the Everglades right now isn't just an invasion. It's a chain reaction. A parasite that hitched a ride. Predators that started learning. And a forgotten king that humans erased decades ago, quietly coming back. And the most disturbing part? Even if every single python vanished tomorrow, the damage wouldn't stop. This isn't a story about winning or losing anymore. It's the story of a three-way war that no one expected, and no one knows how to end. Long before the chaos, the Everglades were something rare. Not just a swamp, not just a wilderness. It was a living system so finely balanced that disrupting one piece could unravel everything. Stretching across more than 1 million acres, the Everglades functioned like a slow-moving river. Water crept south inch by inch, feeding sawgrass plains, tree islands, and mangrove forests in a rhythm that hadn't changed for thousands of years. Every species here played a role. Remove one, and another filled the gap. Take away too many, and the system collapsed. And it wasn't just wildlife that depended on it. This ecosystem filtered drinking water for millions of people. It buffered hurricanes. It controlled floods. Economists once estimated its value at tens of billions of dollars every year. Not because it was beautiful, but because it worked. The Everglades were loud back then. Flocks of wading birds filled the sky so densely they looked like moving clouds. Raccoons, marsh rabbits, and possums were everywhere, darting through the grass and along the roads. Predators like bobcats and foxes followed closely behind, keeping populations in check. Nothing dominated. Everything balanced everything else. And that's what made the collapse so shocking. Because it didn't arrive with explosions or mass die-offs. It arrived quietly. The invasion most people know didn't start with a single moment. It started with a perfect storm of human mistakes. In the 1980s and 90s, Burmese pythons were trendy. Exotic. Cheap. A few dollars bought a snake small enough to fit in your hand. But these weren't pets meant to stay small. Within a few years, those snakes stretched past 10 feet. Then 15. Then more. They became dangerous. Impossible to house. Illegal to sell. So people did what humans often do when responsibility catches up. They dumped the problem somewhere else. The edge of the Everglades became a release zone. Owners convinced themselves they were setting the animals free. At the same time, Florida was battered by storms. Hurricanes tore through the region, damaging facilities that bred and stored exotic reptiles. Records were incomplete. Numbers were never confirmed. And here's where the story starts to crack. Because some researchers believe the explosion happened too fast. Far too fast. The population growth didn't match scattered pet releases. The math didn't line up. Whispers started circulating. What if it wasn't just a few escaped snakes? What if entire breeding operations collapsed at once? Thousands released into an environment that was practically designed for them? Warm temperatures, endless shallow water, and prey that had never evolved to recognize a predator like this. The Everglades weren't just suitable for pythons. They were perfect. Once established, the takeover was brutal and almost invisible. Burmese pythons don't announce themselves. They blend in. They wait. They strike when prey least expects it. Their bodies disappear into grass and water so completely that even experienced hunters walk past them without realizing it. They don't need to eat often. When they do, they eat big. Raccoons, foxes, deer, birds, anything warm-blooded that moves. And the native animals had no defense. No instinct to flee. No evolutionary memory telling them danger was nearby. Within years, entire populations collapsed. Studies later revealed numbers so extreme they sounded fake. Some mammals dropped by over 99% in affected areas. Not thinned, not reduced, gone. And what shocked biologists the most wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. The roads that once required drivers to stop for animals became empty. The night sounds vanished. The Everglades didn't look destroyed. They sounded hollow. People assumed the pythons had won, that the story ended there. But while everyone was focused on the visible predator, something else was spreading, something smaller, quieter, and far more dangerous. And it didn't need fangs. The first warning signs didn't come from the pythons themselves. They came from what scientists were finding inside other snakes. Native species. Ones that had lived in Florida for thousands of years. Garter snakes. Water snakes. Pygmy rattlesnakes. Healthy just years earlier. Now thin. Weak. Struggling to breathe. At first, researchers thought it was stress. Or starvation. Or habitat loss finally catching up. Then they opened the bodies. What they found stopped the room cold. The lungs were packed. Not with fluid. Not with damage from injury. But with movement. Dozens. Sometimes hundreds. Tiny pale shapes writhing through airways that were never meant to hold them. It was a parasite most American scientists had never seen before. And it didn't originate in Florida. The organism had a name few people outside research circles would ever hear. A lungworm native to Southeast Asia. A silent passenger that had traveled thousands of miles inside the bodies of Burmese pythons. In their original range, this parasite wasn't a death sentence. Asian snakes had coexisted with it for generations. Their bodies adapted. Their immune systems learned how to tolerate it. But Florida's snakes had never faced anything like this. To them, it was an alien invader. And the way it spread made it almost impossible to stop. An infected python passed eggs into the environment. Insects fed on the waste. Lizards and frogs ate the insects. Then native snakes ate the frogs. From there, the larvae didn't stay in the stomach. They burrowed through tissue, migrating directly into the lungs. They fed. They reproduced. They clogged airways until breathing became work. Then pain. Then failure. Many infected snakes didn't die quickly. They weakened slowly. Too weak to hunt. Too weak to escape predators. Some suffocated over weeks. By the time scientists understood what was happening, the parasite had already jumped species. And that's when the real fear set in. Because this wasn't just happening in the Everglades anymore. Infected native snakes started appearing far beyond the southern wetlands. County after county. Species after species. The parasite had found new hosts, and it no longer needed pythons to survive. That was the moment the situation crossed a line. Up until then, there was still a fantasy solution. Kill the pythons. Remove the invader. Let the ecosystem recover. But now, even if every python disappeared overnight, the parasite would remain. It had established itself. It was reproducing independently. And it was spreading through native wildlife on its own. The invasion had evolved. Some scientists started asking uncomfortable questions. Could it adapt further? Could it move into mammals? Could it jump again? Publicly, the answer was no. Highly unlikely. No evidence. Privately, many admitted they didn't think it would ever jump from Asian pythons to American garter snakes either. One detail added a strange twist to the fear. A native species, the Florida cottonmouth, showed an unusual resistance. Infections were rare. Severe symptoms almost non-existent. No one knew why. Was it genetic? Diet-related? Something in their blood? Or was it luck? Either way, it suggested something unsettling. Nature wasn't standing still. It was reacting, adapting, and humans were already too late. With the ecosystem unraveling faster than anyone could contain, Florida turned to the one thing people always turn to when systems break: control. If nature couldn't fix it, humans would force a solution. The result was a spectacle. Public hunts. Cash prizes. Headlines celebrating snake removals like trophies. Hundreds of volunteers wading into swamps armed with hooks and bravado. The numbers looked impressive on paper, but they meant almost nothing. Removing hundreds from a population estimated in the hundreds of thousands barely slowed reproduction. For every python captured, dozens more hatched unseen. High-tech solutions followed. Drones, thermal cameras, decoys, even robotic prey. None of it worked. The swamp was too dense. The snakes too well camouflaged. Too patient. Too efficient. Eventually, officials admitted what no one wanted to hear. Eradication was impossible. The best they could do was manage the damage. And that's when Florida announced a plan so absurd the entire world laughed. When the announcement hit the news, it sounded like satire. Florida officials were releasing more snakes into the wild. Not fewer, not contained, not behind fences. More. Social media exploded instantly. Memes flooded timelines. Commentators compared it to every ecological disaster in history. People asked how a place already drowning in invasive predators could possibly think this was a good idea. To the public, it sounded like surrender wrapped in denial. But the plan wasn't about adding another problem. It was about restoring something humans had already destroyed. The snake at the center of the outrage wasn't foreign. It wasn't invasive. It wasn't new. It was the eastern indigo snake. Long before Burmese pythons arrived, this species ruled the southeastern forests. Massive, muscular, and fearless, the indigo was the region's undisputed apex reptile. It didn't rely on venom. It didn't constrict. It overpowered. What made it legendary wasn't its size or strength. It was its diet. The eastern indigo eats other snakes. Venomous ones. Rattlesnakes. Cottonmouths. Copperheads. It pins them down with brute force and swallows them alive, completely immune to their venom. For thousands of years, it shaped the ecosystem simply by existing. And then humans erased it. The indigo's decline had nothing to do with pythons. It began much earlier, with habitat destruction. Vast longleaf pine forests once covered tens of millions of acres across the southeast. Nearly all of it was logged, developed, or suppressed by fire management. At the same time, another key species vanished, the gopher tortoise. Indigo snakes don't dig their own shelters. They rely on tortoise burrows for refuge from cold, heat, and fire. When tortoises were hunted and displaced, the indigos lost their homes. By the mid-20th century, people were actively killing them out of fear. During hard times, tortoises were dug up for food, and any snakes found inside were dispatched without hesitation. By the late 1970s, the eastern indigo snake was gone from large portions of its range. Listed as threatened. Reduced to fragments. The emperor had fallen. What the public saw as a reckless move was actually decades in the making. Conservationists had been breeding indigos in captivity for years. Carefully. Slowly. Waiting for habitat restoration to catch up. Rebuilding longleaf pine ecosystems. Protecting gopher tortoises. Every release was monitored. Tagged. Tracked. This wasn't a reaction. It was a long-delayed correction. Still, the fear wasn't irrational. History was full of examples where humans tried to fix nature and made things worse. Cane toads. Mongooses. Solutions that multiplied into disasters. The difference here was simple. The indigo wasn't an experiment. It was a return. But while humans debated and argued, something else was happening quietly in the swamp. Nature wasn't waiting. Researchers tracking a large male python in Big Cypress expected routine data. Instead, they found the body sprawled in the grass. The head was gone. Not crushed. Not torn apart. Chewed. Nearby camera footage revealed the culprit. A bobcat. A native predator barely half the python's weight had taken down an apex invader once thought untouchable. The discovery stunned wildlife biologists. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it didn't stop there. Alligators began ambushing smaller pythons. Panthers were documented doing the same. Isolated incidents at first. Then patterns. The theory emerged quietly. Predators were learning. Not through language. Through observation. Through trial and survival. The invaders weren't invisible anymore. The Everglades weren't surrendering. They were adapting. Slowly. Painfully. Unevenly. But adapting. While the South struggled under the weight of invasion, something remarkable was happening far from the Everglades. Quiet. Uncelebrated. Almost unnoticed. In the forests of North Florida, conservation teams had been releasing captive-bred eastern indigo snakes into protected land for years. Not into chaos. Not into collapsing wetlands. But into carefully restored longleaf pine ecosystems, habitat that once defined the Southeast. Each snake was tagged. Tracked. Monitored. Scientists hoped they would survive. They didn't expect them to thrive. Then, in the fall of 2023, trail cameras captured footage that changed everything. Two small indigo snakes slid across the forest floor. No tags. No markers. No human interference. They were wild-born. For the first time in nearly half a century, eastern indigo snakes had successfully reproduced in their ancestral home without human assistance. This wasn't survival anymore. It was revival. As months passed, the signs multiplied. larger males moving confidently through restored habitat, previously released snakes still alive years later, juveniles appearing where no releases had occurred. The ecosystem was doing something it hadn't done in decades. It was functioning. The longleaf pines were returning. Gopher tortoise burrows were once again scattered across the landscape. Shelter existed. Prey existed. Balance was slowly reassembling itself. No technology. No spectacle. No headlines. Just patience. And that's the part no one expected. Because for years, the Everglades story was framed as human failure. Exotic pets. Broken containment. Desperate fixes that never worked. But the footage told a different story. Nature wasn't waiting to be saved. It was waiting to be allowed to heal. That doesn't mean the crisis is over. The Burmese pythons still dominate the south. The parasite continues spreading. The damage done to mammals and reptiles can't simply be undone. And the three forces shaping Florida's future are now on a collision course. The python, expanding north. The parasite, spreading independently. And the emperor, slowly reclaiming lost ground. What happens when they finally meet? What happens when a restored apex predator encounters a plague it never evolved to face? Are we rebuilding an ecosystem, or setting the stage for the next collapse? That's the real aftermath nobody expected. Not an ending, a reckoning. If you want to keep following how this story unfolds, how nature adapts, fights back, and rewrites the rules, make sure you're subscribed. These are the stories most people miss, and they're only just beginning. And if you have a theory about who wins this three-way war, drop it in the comments.